I'm about to show you a Russian anecdote, so a short, funny story or joke, that illustrates the idea of verb aspect quite nicely. I'll read it to you in Russian first, then in English, and then we'll have a chat about what's going on. So here we go. Спорят двое. Я в молодости поднимал штангу на 200 килограмм. Не может быть, не верю. А я поднимал, но, правда, так и не поднял. One more time. Спорят двое. Первый говорит: я в молодости поднимал штангу на 200 килограмм. Другой отвечает: не может быть, не верю. А тот говорит: а я поднимал, но, правда, так и не поднял. So now for the English translation. Two gentlemen are having an argument. The first one says, when I was young and fit, I used to lift up 200 kilogram weights. The other one replies, no way, I'm not believing that. But then the other one says, I really was lifting up 200 kilogram weights, I promise you. Though the thing is, I never lifted them up. So there we go. I'll give you a moment to have a think about that, to take it all in. And don't worry, we'll talk about verb aspect in just a moment. First of all, though, let's have a look at the glossary. We'll take a look at some new words for you, maybe. So clearly an important verb pair today will be поднимать and поднять. That means to lift up or to raise. Then we have the noun штанга, which is feminine, and this means a weight, right? So a weight that you use at the gym. Then we have молодость, and молодость refers to your youth, and depending on the context, Russians may use this to also add an element of being young and fit as well, so sporty. And then we have this fixed expression, не может быть. Literally it means it can't be, or it can't be so. In English we would probably say no way. And this is used by Russians to either show their surprise, shock, or, as in the example of the anecdote, to show their disbelief. And then we have pravda, which you may know means truth, but it can also act as a conjunction, and it would mean something like however, though, maybe even albeit. I use the phrase the thing is, that kind of idea. Right, now let's return to the joke and we'll have a think about what this means in a bit more detail. So, спорят двое. Two people are arguing, not necessarily gentlemen, but двое, yes, okay, it means two, but it's a very particular word class that refers to two entities. And спорить means to have an argument, or, as in this case, to have a bet. Probably I should have included this in the glossary, but never mind. Then we have я в молодости, in your youth, so you're referring to the time when you were young, поднимал. So we're using the imperfective. In English we would probably translate that with either I was lifting or I used to lift, or lift up. Не может быть, не верю, don't believe you. А я поднимал. And that at the start really adds that emphasis of, but I did though, I seriously did. Но, правда, but, though, the thing is, так и не поднял. Так и, also a common construction, means something like, after all maybe, or despite all my effort, in the end, I wasn't successful. Basically, так и не поднял. That's the point. Now, because we're using the perfective, the joke makes sense to Russians. Okay, so when they're hearing it for the first time, when native speakers listen to this for the first time, they do not at all pay attention to the fact that поднимал is in the imperfective. All they're doing is visualizing this action of lifting up a weight. Only then, at the end, when the perfective is introduced and when it is juxtaposed against the imperfective, does it make sense and it's supposed to be funny. It's when the two aspects are, next to each other and when they're contrasted, does this joke actually work? And that's what the whole anecdote is trying to play on. So let's talk about these two verbs in a bit more detail now. Поднимать and поднять, the imperfective and perfective respectively. So let me remind you that the imperfective has two separate uses. The first one is if you want to focus on the process itself. So on the actual contracting of the muscles, lifting up of the arm, and the weight coming up and moving through the air. That whole idea, that whole process indeed, is being referred to with the imperfective. Поднимать. Or the other use of the imperfective is to describe the multiple occasions on which the process happened, or will happen, or is happening. So I do want to draw your attention to the fact that aspect and tense, although quite similar and linked, they are still different things. Multiple occasions can be in the past, can be now in the present, in the general present, or in the future, right? So perhaps a year ago, maybe, every Tuesday you would go to the gym and you would be lifting up weights. If that's the idea that you want to refer to, if you want to talk about that period of time when, every week you would go to the gym and you would be lifting up weights, you would use the imperfective. However, with the perfective, you are communicating something else. You want to focus on the result of the process, on what has been achieved. In Russian, it's a big deal. You are caring about the fact that now the weight is no longer on the ground, but it's now in the air. And that point in time, as soon as the weight reaches its final position to where you want to lift it, and the period of time just after that, when the process has taken place, it's finished, and now there's been a result from it, that is what the perfective is referring to. That's what it's describing. And it follows from that the perfective only ever describes a single occurrence of an event, and again emphasizing the result of it. Only one time in the past or only one time in the future. Obviously not in the present, you know about that already, hopefully. So by using поднять, you are only talking about one specific date, place and time when you lifted up one specific particular weight. Yes, okay, you may have lifted that weight up many times in the past, but when you use the perfective, you are only talking about one occasion. You are isolating and you are focusing only on that one time. And of course, the imperfective is associated with, this idea of frequency or something happening habitually, continuously, whilst the perfective can only refer to a finished, completed event. So let me now show you an example sentence where this might make a bit more sense now. Когда я поднимал штангу, он зашел в комнату. When I was lifting up the weight, and then, for example, he entered the room. The same sentence but with the perfective. Когда я поднял штангу, он зашел в комнату. When I lifted the weight, he entered the room. So do you notice the difference? It's only very subtle in English, but in Russian, it really is a big deal. A better way of forming the second sentence is the following. После того, как, after I had lifted the weight, or after having lifted the weight. And it makes more sense in both languages, really. So let's take a look at this diagrammatically. So as time slowly elapses and as you're starting to lift up this weight and it's moving through the air, and then all of a sudden he comes into the room, but you're continuing lifting up the weight, and only then do you finish. So the two actions are happening in parallel, simultaneously at the same time. Whilst with the perfective, yes, you're also lifting up the weight, but then you stop. And then after that, he comes into the room. So only once you have finished lifting the weight does the next action happen, because the perfective can only be used for events that have finished, right? Do remember also about the other uses of the aspect, right? So when you say «когда я поднимал штангу», You might be referring to a period of time in the past when you would be frequently lifting up the weight. That might be what you want to say as well. So now let's have a look at the joke again. I'm reminding you that Russians won't pay attention to the fact that поднимал is in the imperfective. At the start of the joke, all they're doing is they're visualizing this guy trying to lift up a 200 kilogram weight. Only at the end, when the perfective is introduced, does the joke then make sense. Of course, поднимать does presume some kind of lifting going on. It does indicate that there is movement up into the air and the thing has come off the ground most of the time. But only when you see поднять do we realize that actually поднимать was referring solely to the guy holding on to the weight, making those typical facial expressions when they're trying to lift something up, grunting, trying to lift it up, but it doesn't come off the ground. That is what the поднимать in this joke is referring to. Now, there is a bit of exaggeration going on. I hope you understand that, but you probably get the idea. And that's what you would expect because perfective really does bother about the result. With поднимать, it's not really clear initially whether the thing has actually, ended up in the air in its final position or not. But with поднять, it absolutely is. So that's it for today. I hope this makes sense. If you didn't find this video as useful as you would have hoped, then let me tell you the following. Understanding when to use which verb aspect in Russian, or for that matter in any Slavic language, is something that comes with time and with a lot of practice and exposure, as you probably know anyway. When we were growing up as Russian children, we didn't read textbooks about grammar. We just heard our parents, our teachers, characters in the cartoons that we watched, people on the streets using these verb aspects thousands and thousands of times until we started getting a feel for when it's appropriate to use the imperfective or the perfective. So you need to try to reflect that as much as possible as well. And the other thing I want to say is that, as with everything, there are exceptions. There may be situations when, in a particular sentence, according to all the grammar rules and according to common sense, you would use the imperfective. But for some reason, despite everything I've taught you in all these videos, Russians use the perfective. And yet it still sounds natural and it's perfectly fine. That happens on very rare occasions, but just do bear in mind that there are exceptions. So there we go, that's it. If you have any questions, feel free to ask in the comments. Good luck, see you next time, goodbye.